Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry Faber. I'm one of the founders at Oppenheimer Education. And this week, I feel really privileged that we have Dr. Mary Bousted joining us. Dr. Mary is a leading figure for teachers in this country and probably needs no introduction for most in the teaching profession, but I'll do it anyway. She spent a life researching, writing about, and representing the profession. Pretty much all her adult career, I believe. Brought up in Bolton as number 7 of 8 children, a fascinating way to start the world. She studied English at Hull, and her early teaching career in the early 90s took her forward from there. And in 2003, I believe I'm right in saying that she answered an advert in The Guardian and was duly elected, a little later down the line probably, General Secretary of the Association of Teachers and Lecturers. And then in 2017, Mary became Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union after that merger of the ATL and NUT. And I think I'm right in saying that's now the largest education union in Europe with over 500,000 members. Her term in office ended in 2023, and I can't wait to find out what she's been doing since. One further feather in her cap that I just feel like I had to mention is that alongside Kevin Courtney, Mary led an 8-day national strike that achieved the biggest teacher payout award for 30 years. A career spent championing the profession in every sense. She's usually to be found on national television, on Newsnight, on Question Time, you name it. So I feel very lucky that she's offered to share her experience and wisdom for us today. So Mary, thank you very much and welcome to Heads and Tails.
Gosh, is that me?
Everyone always says that, but it is you. It is you. Hopefully I didn't get any of it wrong. I've probably forgotten loads of important bits. So as you know, to kick us off, we're obsessed with mentoring. That's what my organization does. We're fascinated in all things around mentorship and role modeling. Did you have a mentor yourself? I'd love to hear any perspectives on mentorship, either old or new, that you'd be happy to share.
Yes, I did. I mean, I think my biggest mentor was Christine Gilbert, now Dame Christine Gilbert, who was the chief inspector. And I met her when I went to my first school in Harrow as a English teacher. She was the deputy head. And then she moved to another school and appointed me as head of English. So I worked with her on and off really closely for about 6 years. She was a fantastic school leader, called head teacher in those days. She was dedicated. She was really far-seeing. She was determined to achieve social justice through education. She led from the front, but she always listened to her staff. The number of times particularly as head of English, I'd march into her office in the morning furious about something, and she would let you challenge. You know, anything I was furious about, she'd listen to the challenge. She wouldn't always agree with me, but she let me have my say. And she treated her staff, her teachers, as informed professionals, which is something I think we have lost in the system in too many schools.
That's lovely. What I take from that is that sense of almost being on a level playing field, or having that sense that you can challenge in both directions. Feels really important for every workplace, and definitely a school culture, I'm sure. Perhaps we can learn a little bit more about you as a student when you were at school, maybe pre-university. Is there an anecdote that slightly defines your experience, or if you think back on
Yeah,
school?
I was a bit of a rebel really at school. I didn't grace to school with my presence in a way that the nuns would have liked it. I went to a girls' convent grammar school, and well, in my family, we'd been taught to say our point of view. With 8 children, my father's way of dealing with 8 argumentative children was to, around the dinner table, would be introduced a topic, usually from the Manchester Guardian, headline from Manchester Guardian, and you were required to debate it. You were allowed to say whatever you wanted as long as you didn't do 2 things. You didn't go against the teachings of the church, and you weren't rude to my parents. But with those 2 caveats, you were allowed to say one. So I absolutely grew up in an environment where it was expected that you presented your case and argued, and that wasn't really very much encouraged. Where at this girls' convent grammar school, where you were expected to be seen and not heard, which is not something I ever did. So I was fairly challenging a lot of the time, including, I remember most challenging was in the 4th year, when, what would I be? That'd be 15, when a 70-year-old nun was attempting to give us a family planning lesson. And I argued strongly that the rhythm method was not the only form of contraception available, for which I got thrown out of the class and sent to the head teacher. So, yeah, I mean, I was a bit of a pain in the butt, really, at school.
And well, we're excited to hear whether that characteristic carried on. And it sounds like in some
Well,
ways
being a
it did.
pain in the butt,
Yeah,
definitely, yeah. Okay,
made
okay.
made a professional of it. No, that's great. I think that speaks to a whole different time, doesn't it? Just an extraordinary. Yeah, think of that taking place in schools today. No doubt your career has had some really tough bits. I mean, in many ways, I guess you've been fighting all your career, but I'd love to know whether you reflect on any of it that's been hardest or that's been most obviously tough.
I think I think that whenever you're doing something that the state doesn't want you to do, and you're opposing the state, which is really the government and the agencies of government and the civil service, that's really tough. And I can think of 3 occasions when I was doing that: the pension strikes of 2011, uh, during COVID, and the government, particularly the DfE's response to the COVID um, pandemic, and the national strike action in 2022, 2023, where 8 days of national strike action. In all those situations, you're going up against the state and the power of the state, and you're also going up against a very hostile media, because unions never get a balanced media; it's always very, very hostile. And to sustain that for significant periods of time, both in COVID and both in the strike action over pay, you're not only dealing with the government, which is opposed, with the media, which is hostile, but you're also dealing with a huge amount of internal pressure within the union. During COVID, huge pressure from members to be kept safe. And during national strike action, you're dealing with the very different views of different members of the union and different members of the executive about how that campaign should be pursued. So you've got this huge amount of pressure internally, and then the pressure of the state and its organs pressing down on you. And that, for the strike action, that lasted, best part of a year. So, and COVID, keeping members safe and trying to keep education open safely during COVID, that lasted the best part of 2 years. So I think the most difficult time was, the 5 years of forming the National Education Union in 2017. That was very stressful. And then COVID, and then the national strike action. In those 5 years, I think we fitted in what most unions were fitting in 15 years, really.
You don't look worn down by it though. Is there did that pressure, did that heaviness that I feel people at any level of education or the system probably feel in some respect on a day-to-day basis, did that embolden you, or did you ever just think, I'm just going to chuck in the towel on this?
Oh, you don't think you're going to chuck in the towel, because you've put your shoulder to the wheel, and you have a moral and ethical responsibility. You've been elected into the position, and you've been elected there because the members think that you can do the job for them, and the job requires particular skills, and either through me being very dysfunctional or functioning in certain very unusual ways, I can do those things. Um, but to say that you aren't frequently exhausted, frequently very pressurized. I mean, really, when you're going through a national industrial action, that takes up all your waking and your sleeping hours. There isn't any time for anything else. Um, and so by the end of the 5 years with the NEU, well, Kevin and I had both said that we would do 5 years as joint general secretaries, and then we would both leave and the union would take its course under a new general secretary. And by the end of those 5 years, you do get that sort of real challenge about, well, what will I do with my life now? Because the job has taken up so much of your waking hours and your sleeping hours. But actually leaving the pressure and demands of the job, I felt I'd been a general secretary for 20 years and it was time I moved on.
Yeah, amazing. But it must fill a vacuum all the same, I'm sure. And
Mm.
despite all that difficulty and complexity, I hope there've been some real summits of progress and moments of joy in there. Any that particularly stand out as the best moments?
Well, there was one really, and it was during COVID. It was on the 3rd of January 2021, and the Delta variant was just spreading like wildfire, and Boris Johnson had said that all schools had to open, all primary schools had to open on the 4th of January. And I was phoned by Kevin Courtney on New Year's Day, where I was sitting slightly worse for wear, and he said, "We've got thousands of members getting in touch, and they're terrified about going back." And so I gave up any ideas of a hangover, and we spent 2 days preparing for a Zoom call with the members, and where we agreed that we would advise the members that they had an individual right under the Health and Safety of Work Act 1996 not to enter a workplace which would endanger their health. And the preparation was huge for that. We had to get the script ready. I wrote the script. We had to get the advice ready for the members. We had to get a model letter that they could write to their head teacher. We only had a Zoom license of 30,000. We had to work out how to transmit the call on YouTube as well. Anyhow, we did the call, and we had over 400,000 members online. That was the scale of the anxiety, worry, and stress that was being caused by what our members felt was a reckless approach to school opening in the middle of a pandemic without a vaccination. And by the end of that day, 30% of the primary school teachers, who are not your most militant letters, 30% of the primary teachers in England and Wales had written letters to their head teachers. And then the next day, of course, on January the 4th, at 8:00, Boris Johnson closed the schools. So that, for me, that should never have had to happen. The government should have been, well, right from the beginning, they said there are ways in which we can keep the education open, we can keep schools open, but it will require this. They refused to engage with us, which Conservative governments generally refuse to engage with unions, and just kept promoting the idea that children weren't damaged by COVID. Well, that's absolutely true. We never said that children, it's an age-related illness, but members of the adult staff felt very, very targeted and threatened. And then, of course, as Boris Johnson said on the 4th of January, schools have become vectors for COVID transmission because, when schools, so we had argued throughout the social distancing in school, for the procuring of other buildings so that we could have distance learning, so we could keep schools open. This narrative that the NEU wanted to close schools is simply not true. We wanted to keep schools and education open, but open safely. And I think having over 400,000 members online just really demonstrated the power of the union and the importance of a union for teachers and support staff to be able to act collectively when they need to, and to show that they could act collectively, which they did.
400,000 members on a Zoom call. It strikes me that's probably 5 times Wembley Stadium, isn't it? Something like that.
Something like it's the biggest ever Zoom call, we think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's definitely. I hope you've got a framed photograph of. Imagine
No, we
if you
haven't.
could have them. There
No, we
must be some
haven't, no.
evidence of it.
We just, well, I think the call will still be available. We just, have to just crack on.
I hope you diaried it. On that note, on the diary note, I love to try and support people with some content, and people are always interested. Are you a reader? Do you watch films? Do you listen to podcasts? How do you get your content? What would you be happy to share with us?
Well, I'm very old-fashioned. I think that I don't get content because I'm not that sort of girl, and I find IT quite baffling most of the time and frustrating the rest of the time. I just have to use it, but I use it in a very basic way. I read a lot, and I was an English teacher. I did a degree in English, and that's what I do. I used to, when I was General Secretary, I had quite an active Twitter account, X account. I still have that, but it's much less active. I'm an avid reader, and that's how I spend my time.
And
I like films as well.
what can you recommend for us? Something, it could be fiction, non-fiction, doesn't have to be educational, anything you'd be excited to share.
Well, my favourite ever book is A Room with a View by Ian Forster. And it's one of those books that I can read again and again. If you want something less highbrow, then I think that Terry Pratchett, Night Watch Guard series is, if I'm feeling down, I can read those and I'm laughing very, very quickly.
Love that.
Yeah.
Those are wonderful. That's great. I think it's lovely to hear some fiction. Actually, I'm always pushing for people to give me some fiction recommendations. I've read one, but not both of those. So there we go. I've got an obvious choice. We always like to ask people on this show a little bit about an unpopular opinion they're happy to stand up behind. Something controversial, anything you think is a topic of debate or news, or Could be something silly, doesn't have to be huge. Perhaps it's something you're happy to get up and defend.
Yeah. So I was thinking hard about this. I find the cosseting of animals, of pets, really quite ridiculous, particularly dogs. So it now seems that people think of dogs as another member, a human member of the family. And, you've got coats and you've got special harnesses and you've got special leads and you've got special food. I've got a very good friend who, um, won't leave her dog. So she's become completely isolated because she can't meet me in London because she doesn't have anyone to look after her dog. And, then I see regularly dogs being wheeled in prams. What is the point of a dog if they're not walking? I mean, the whole point of a dog is that we take you out for a walk. I just think that and I also think that, if there was a question, I mean, Kate Bush was on the publicising this week an animation she's been involved in where it was about a child in war, but the animation was changed to a shrew. And Kate Bush said, well, I think people would care more if it was a shrew. How have we got to the stage where, and it's always been an English sort of vice, that we care more for animals than we do for children? That the RSPCA was established before the NSPCC, and that we attribute to poor children and vulnerable children too often a blame for their poverty and their unequal start in life. And we just completely get soppy and uncritical and unthinking about animals. And yes, that may make me very unpopular, but that's what I think.
I enjoy that. I love that honesty. I think that's refreshing to hear. And I've certainly watched a lot of friends get locked away by their pets and, struggle to do anything else as a result. But that's a personal preference. Might not be me, but well, yeah,
Well,
I
I
enjoyed
think
that.
they sort of think that if they do that, that they'll get a moral plus. Well, actually, I just think if you do that, you're stupid.
There you go. You've heard it here first. Thank you, Mary. I've got a couple more questions. One is on script, one slightly off. So we always ask for a piece of advice for those in the sector. And I say the sector because not everyone is necessarily teaching. So it can be broader than that or it can be specific to teachers. Something you would share. And you must have an album of advice. There must be memoirs due,
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear
So,
what you'd share
well,
if
I
pushed.
think the most important thing to be aware of if you are a leader is that absolutely you have to lead. And there are times where there have been many times where I've had to say, actually, all you've got to do now is this, because I don't have time. You're under huge pressure. I don't have time to debate this. You've just got to do it. I expect you to do it. But that should be used as a last resort. Most of the time, as a leader, it is really important for you to have a wide range of voices around you and to provide structured opportunities for those who you expect to implement whatever you finally decide to give their views on it, to be open to those views. A number of times, people have come into my office as General Secretary and said, I know you're not going to like this, but I'm going to tell you. You're not going to agree with me, but I feel I have to say this. And that is the time when you put down your computer keyboard or you stop tapping on your computer keyboard, you turn towards them and you say, all right, what do you want to say? You might have to say, I've got 3 minutes, but what is it you want to say? And listen. And then when you have made a decision, to make it very clear to those people, if you've not done what they said, I did listen to you. I'm not doing it for these reasons. So they feel heard. So they feel the voice. I am absolutely determined to say that much of the problem we have with teacher morale and the cause of poor teacher retention is teachers not feeling that they have a professional voice at work and not feeling that they are heard, that feeling that they have to implement policies which if only somebody would listen to them could be so much better, feeling that they're not supported, feeling that they are too often treated like pupils rather than treated like the adults that they are. So leadership is as much about listening as it is about deciding. Now, of course, in the end, you can't abdicate the responsibility to decide, and you can't abdicate the responsibility that comes with it for the decision. But your decisions will be better informed if you're a good listener.
I beautiful answer. I really enjoyed all of that. So how can we enable that professional voice at work for those teachers that's lacking? What's the route to changing that ability for teachers to have their voice heard?
Well, it's a whole school culture, isn't it? It's a whole school culture. And I think for too long, under the pressure of what I consider to be an invalid and unreliable inspection system, leaders have felt under such pressure to get things done so things will be right when the inspector calls, that's led to chasing after the metrics that Ofsted use to assess education quality, whether that be exam results, whether that be attendance, whether that be uh, book reviews, whether that be obsessive focus on data and in-school data to prove progress. Um, and that sense that leaders have that there is uh, such a pressure on them was passed down and led to, in far too many schools, teachers being treated as grown-up children. Um, and there was just too much pressure, and these things had to be done, and teachers had to do them. And what the system is finding now is that that's resulted in appalling teacher retention rates. 1 in 3 leaving within 5 years. The number of vacancies in schools doubling since before the pandemic. And what we have to learn now is if you treat teachers like that, you won't keep them. And if you don't keep them, there's not a ready supply elsewhere. So you really have to create a whole school culture where obviously things have to happen and lessons have to be taught and, bureaucracy has to be done. But we have to move off from being bottom of the league table in the OECD for teachers saying, I have a voice at work. And we have to move to be top of that. Now, it's up to each school to think about how they will really listen to teacher voice. It should certainly be the case, for example, I think, that school policies which teachers are required to implement are the focus of discussion at staff meetings, and teachers can give their response about how that policy is working. How is the assessment policy working? How is the behaviour policy working? Those policies exist in a filing cabinet, but they're not real unless teachers can actually give feedback and talk about how they could be made better. They are the ones who are required to implement these policies. They should have a say in how they're working, and they should be revised in the light of teacher expertise. So the recreation of teacher as expert professional is absolutely vital to our profession. It's absolutely something which is at the centre of well-being. And if well-being exists in you can book a massage, or I'm going to give you a £20 voucher from Marks and Spencer's, that's not it. Well-being at work is the sense that you are valued, you have a voice, you have agency in your work. And that is at the core of feeling in control of work and in feeling that you can make a contribution. So these are difficult things to achieve, but they are absolutely necessary if we're going to turn around the teacher retention crisis.
I feel like we could carry this chat on for an hour, and I'm gutted that we've run out of time. I think we've hit the absolute nail on the head there in the last 2-3 minutes of this conversation. And I think your comments are timely and precise and very eloquently put. And I know will be the cause of further conversation, not just in my office here this afternoon once we log off, but for our lucky audience members who are going to enjoy this. So Dr. Mary, you have been really kind to share the time with us that you have, and all your energy, and I think the empowerment you bring to the profession, which I know is so important for so many other people involved. All those 400,000 on the Zoom call and everyone else since. So we wish you every success with what's to come. Hopefully a little bit more time. Hopefully a little bit less stress. Still living in Westminster to power the fight from there. And so big thank you from me at Oppidan, and wishing you well.
Thank you very much.